unreasonable in that way, and I'll give you a caveat to that too in a moment. The rabbi is a very open-minded, tolerant, highly educated, thoughtful fellow, Rabbi Benjamin Samuels. He's actually right now also studying for doctorate, I think, at Boston University in religion, science, and philosophy, or something like that. Many of my friends in the shul believe are on the same wavelength as I am. I've been studying Talmud for the last 28 years with a Talmud study group on Shabbat afternoon, and again, many, if not all, of the members of that group, I can't speak for the specific belief systems of all of them, but I thank them actually in the acknowledgement section of my book, are very much on the same wavelength with me. And I know, well, I sense that there are many people in the shul who, to a greater or lesser degree, are sympathetic to some of the views in the book. Who they sit in shul, and when they're hearing the Torah read, they're not saying, this was word for word a verbatim revelation from God. So I haven't really felt much flack or ostracism from the shul community of which I am a member. Now, if I was living in a different community with a more yeshivish type of orthodoxy, maybe they wouldn't give me an aliyah. I don't know what their policies are. Nowadays, people give aliyahs even to people who are Chalal Shabbat B'Farhesia, because things have changed now from the time when the halachot were written to kind of not allow public desecrators of fundamental laws to get an aliyah. I'm not a Chalal Shabbat B'Farhesia. I'm a Shomer Shabbat B'Farhesia. But so I don't feel ostracism, and surely not in an academic environment. And Hebrew College has always been a cultural, Hebraic cultural institution. It wasn't affiliated with any religious denomination within Judaism, and it defined itself as religious until around 5 or 6 years ago when we set up this trans-denominational rabbinical school. But that's also obviously quite broad in its spectrum of belief systems of the students and the faculty. So I'm perfectly comfortable. I have had more with family issues sometimes with certain members of my family, and I mentioned that in the book too, I think, where they were uncomfortable with my views, and but nothing really particularly serious or any sense of ostracism, and so yeah, that's the situation. Now, I don't feel comfortable, going back to the Rosh Yeshivas that I learned within yeshiva and sticking the book in their face. That would be very hurtful to them, I'm sure. But I'm not in that community anymore.
Where does your book break new ground?
Okay, I think that the main contribution of my book, at least I think it's the main contribution, is where I try to explain in greater depth and detail than maybe some other writers have done, the reasons or the defense strategies that people use to defend themselves against arguments and evidence that challenge their belief systems. So various stratagems of defense. Also, when I get into this discussion, for example, in the 10 or so different ways of construing what is truth or how important truth is into one's life. A third thing, I think also the book, because I do have a chapter on Christian fundamentalism, on Islamic fundamentalism, is kind of the comparative cross-religious perspective and showing a lot of similarities and affinities in fundamentalism across the board. Also, I think I have a very interesting section where I look at an anthropological study basically by Evans Pritchard, a very famous British anthropologist, who looks at the way in which some non-literate Sudanese tribes, the Azande, have a highly complex belief in magic and oracles and sorcery, and trying to analyze how is it that they can keep their belief systems coherent for them, even when there seems to be evidence against the efficacy of the oracle or the magic, etc. And then I try to take some of those concepts which she brilliantly analyzes and see, can I apply that to even more sophisticated religious belief systems, certain like theological beliefs in Orthodoxy, or again, not only in Orthodox Judaism, and try to show that there are a lot of affinities in the way in which the anthropologists have analyzed other groups which seem to have, in our terms at least, none or less sophisticated rational and theological system of belief, and yet see that there are many similarities, although the language is much more sophisticated in contemporary theological discourse, but underlying the concepts that theologians invoke to explain or challenges to their belief system have a lot of similarity to these more primitive methods. So my book is very provocative and controversial. It's written in that tone and deliberately in a certain sense because I want to arouse people to self-reflection and critical thinking. So I think there are a lot of original contributions, but on the other hand, all scholarship is the combination of what you learn from other people. So I cite many different people. I maybe put things together in a unique way, and that's a part of my contribution. I also have this first chapter in which I talk about my own personal grappling with these issues. So, that may be something. I know some people have very much appreciated that, found that very interesting. So, I don't want to, sound that my book is the biggest, the most important book on the subject, and that it's filled with just chidushim, no, but I think it adds something to a literature. I think unlike, for example, Hitchens and Dawkins and Harris, my book does have a deep appreciation of many of the positive aspects of religion, whereas they tend to be much less knowledgeable about religion from the inside, and also not giving it any positive dimensions. I think there are extremely positive aspects of religion, orthodoxy, and of course non-orthodox versions of Judaism as well. So in that sense, I think my book is much more balanced, and I think it's a much more insightful about religion in general than these other books from the kind of the atheist group that's kind of been dominating the bestseller list for the last few years.
I wanted to share very briefly my perspective and then get your reaction. I think in the human being there's a great need to believe in things that are at times that are non-rational and even irrational, and that orthodoxy's belief in the divinity of the Torah is very similar to a man's belief that his wife is the most beautiful woman in the world when clearly empirically she's not, or when people become incredibly emotionally invested in a particular sports team. Like, there's no rational reason why someone should be invested in the fortunes of the New York Yankees. Right. And there's no rational reason to believe, for a man to believe that his wife is the most beautiful woman in the world. It's just a belief outside of reason that makes your life more rich.
Well, I would say that there's a lot of truth to that. The question is, what happens if that belief, though, also has negative consequences? Let's say this person is addicted to the New York Yankees and therefore spends his whole time there rather than, doing things that he should be doing, making a living or whatever, something more productive. But what happens if a man believes that his wife is not only beautiful, but she's the most perfect person there is, and therefore will not criticize her when she does something wrong? So I definitely agree with you that, and I have a whole section of the book about this, where I try to play the devil's advocate and not just play it. I say, who says that reason is the ultimate criteria for guiding us in how we should lead our life? Reason is an evolved tool of, Homo sapiens, which serves some very important survival functions. That's why it evolved. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a role for emotion, for intuition, for the poetic, for the imagination, etc., which are also very important and maybe in many ways are more important in terms of making life happy, meaningful, and also for survival. So it's not that I'm saying reason is the be-all and end-all. However, it is still a very powerful and useful tool, obviously. All modern science and medicine is based upon, to a large extent, the use of reason and the development of the scientific method. So it is, therefore, you can acknowledge the role that emotional or irrational, even sometimes irrational factors play in life, and they can often be constructive, but not when they're blatantly anti-rational, and particularly where that's going to lead to negative consequences. I talk about this also. In fact, you give that interesting example. I have a chapter